Hello everyone. Today we have a long, quiet story for you to practice your English. It is a story about a man's final journey, a journey to see and feel the simple, beautiful things in life. Before we begin, I have a small question for you. What is a simple thing that makes you happy? It could be the taste of your morning coffee, the sound of rain, or the warmth of the sun. Please tell me your answer in the comments below. I would love to read them. Now let us begin our story. Chapter 1. The Color of Rain. My name is Kaito Tanaka. For 42 years, my world was measured in steps. There were the 7 steps from my bed to the kitchen. There were the 120 steps from my apartment door to the street. And then there were the thousands of steps through the Shinjuku train station. A river of people flowing in and out every single day. My life was a map of straight lines. From home to the station, from the station to my office, and then all the way back again. The lines were always the same. The colors of my world were the gray of the pavement, the black of my suit, and the white of the papers on my desk. I worked in a tall building where you could not open the windows. The air was always the same temperature, summer or winter. I spent my days looking at numbers. The numbers went up and the numbers went down. They were important, I was told. But I never felt their importance in my heart. My heart was with my wife, Yumi. She was the color in my gray world. Her laugh was like a small bell. Her hands, when they touched mine, were always warm. Yumi loved our small balcony. It was her kingdom. She filled it with pots of flowers and herbs. She would talk to her plants as she watered them. "You need a little more sun today," she would whisper to a sleepy rose. "You are growing so strong," she would say to the tiny green shoots of basil. She dreamed of bigger gardens. She kept travel magazines under our bed. They were filled with pictures of places so colorful they did not seem real. "Kaito," she would say, her eyes bright, "when you retire, we will go here. We will see the lavender fields in Hokkaido. The whole world will smell like perfume." I would smile and nod. "Yes, Yumi, when I retire. But we are all gamblers in the game of time. We think we have more than we do." Yumi got sick very suddenly. The doctors used long, complicated words. I sat by her bed and held her hand. It was not warm anymore. The color faded from her world, and then she was gone. That was 3 years ago. After she died, the apartment became too quiet. The balcony garden withered. I did not know how to talk to the plants. I kept going to work. The straight lines of my life were all I had left. The numbers on the page made a kind of sense. They did not feel loss. They did not feel loneliness. They just were. I ate my meals alone at our small kitchen table. I would look at the empty chair where she used to sit, and I would feel a cold space inside me, a room that would never be warm again. Then, one Tuesday, the rain was falling on the city. The grey sky matched the grey buildings. I was sitting in another small room, a doctor's office. This doctor also used long, complicated words, but I understood them this time. He showed me shadows on a screen, shadows that were inside me, growing in the dark. He drew a timeline on a piece of paper. It was a very short line, maybe a year, maybe a little more, if I was lucky. He talked about treatments, about fighting, about hospitals. His voice was kind, but it sounded very far away. All I could hear was a clock. It was not a clock on the wall. It was a clock inside my own chest, and it was ticking very, very loudly. I walked out of the doctor's office and into the rain. The city felt different. The river of people in the station was still there, but I was no longer part of it. I was standing on the shore, watching it flow past me. That night, in my silent apartment, I looked at the empty chair. I looked at the dead plants on the balcony. I looked at my black suit, hanging on the door for tomorrow. A life of straight lines, a life of grey colors. The doctor offered me more lines, more white rooms in a hospital, but I did not want that. For the first time in a very long time, I wanted something different. I wanted color. I pulled the old travel magazines from under the bed. I opened a page to a picture of Hokkaido. A field of purple lavender stretched all the way to the horizon. I remembered Yumi's voice, full of light and dreams. The whole world will smell like perfume. The ticking of the clock in my chest did not sound like an ending anymore. It sounded like a beginning. Chapter 2. The Weight of a Life. The decision, once made, felt like taking a deep breath after being underwater for a very long time. I would not spend my final season in a hospital. I would spend it on the road. I would go on the journey that Yumi and I had always planned. I would see the colors for her. The next morning, I did not put on my black suit. I put on a simple shirt and comfortable trousers. I went to the bank. The man behind the glass counter looked at me with surprise. I had never taken out so much money before. My savings were a record of my 42 years of work. A long column of numbers that I had always thought was for a future that would never happen. Now, it would be my ticket to the world outside my straight lines. Back in my apartment, I started to pack. It was a strange task. How do you pack for the last year of your life? I opened my closet. It was full of identical grey and black suits. They were the uniform of a man I no longer wanted to be. I took them all down. I folded one simple dark jacket. I packed a few shirts, some trousers, and enough socks for a week. I looked at the rows of polished black shoes. I chose only one pair, the comfortable walking shoes I wore on weekends. I moved through the apartment like a ghost. I touched the teacup Yumi used every morning. I ran my fingers over the spine of her favorite book. Each object was a small anchor, holding me to this life, to this room. But I knew I had to let go. I was not leaving these things behind. I was carrying the memory of them with me. That was the only thing that had any weight. I found a small sturdy bag. It was old, one we had used for a short trip many years ago. Into this bag, I put my clothes. I added a toothbrush and a bar of soap. I found a small notebook and a pen. Perhaps I would write things down. I did not know. I also packed a small photograph of Yumi. In the picture, she is standing on our balcony, smiling, with a bright red flower in her hand. Her eyes are full of life. I put the photograph in the inside pocket of my jacket, the one closest to my heart. The bag was not heavy. It felt strange that a whole life of work, of savings, of routine, could be exchanged for something so light. I looked around the apartment one last time. It was just a place full of furniture. The life, the warmth, it had all come from Yumi. And the memory of that warmth was inside me now. I did not need the furniture. I wrote a short letter to my landlord. I told him I was leaving. I left the key on the kitchen table. I did not say goodbye to anyone. My colleagues at the office were just familiar strangers. My few relatives lived far away, and our conversations were always short and formal. My real life, my real connections, were all in the past. My journey was not about finding new people. It was about finding myself, the man who had been lost somewhere along all those straight grey lines. I put on my jacket and picked up my bag. I walked to the door. I paused with my hand on the knob. For a moment, a wave of fear washed over me. The world outside was big and unknown. My apartment was safe, predictable. It would be so easy to stay. It would be so easy to hang my jacket back up, to go to the hospital, to follow the doctor's lines. But then I felt the small square shape of Yumi's photograph against my chest. I thought of the lavender fields. I opened the door and walked out. I did not look back. I walked down the 120 steps to the street. The city was noisy and crowded, as always. But for the first time, I felt the possibility of freedom. I walked towards the Shinjuku station, not as a worker going to his office, but as a traveler, beginning his final most important journey. Chapter 3. The Wide Sky. The train journey north was like watching my old life slowly fade away. The dense grey buildings of Tokyo became smaller and smaller, replaced by green fields and dark forests. The train moved fast, but inside, I felt very still. I was a stone dropped into a river, and the world was flowing past me. After many hours, and a change to a smaller, slower train, I arrived in Hokkaido. When I stepped off the train in a small town called Furano, the first thing I noticed was the sky. In Tokyo, the sky is a small strip of light you see between tall buildings. Here, it was everything. It was a vast blue bowl that stretched from one end of the world to the other. There were a few white clouds, soft and slow, like sleeping animals. I stood on the platform with my small bag and just looked up. I felt a sense of space in my lungs that I had not felt in years. The air itself was different. It was clean and smelled of grass and damp earth. I did not have a plan. I did not have a hotel reservation. I saw a local bus waiting near the station. Its sign said it was going to the countryside. That sounded good to me. I got on the bus. There were only a few other people, mostly old women with shopping baskets. The bus moved slowly along narrow roads. We passed farmhouses with dark wooden walls and fields of green vegetables. Everything was quiet and orderly. After about 30 minutes, I saw a small, simple sign by the road. It said, "Guest house, room for rent." It was in front of an old farmhouse, with a neat garden and a field stretching out behind it. I pulled the cord to stop the bus. I got off and walked up the gravel path. An old woman was in the garden, tying up tomato plants. She looked at me with curious, kind eyes. Her face was a map of wrinkles, and her hands were covered in dirt. "Hello," I said, bowing slightly. "Do you have a room?" She did not say anything. She just smiled a little. A smile that seemed to say she understood everything. She wiped her hands on her apron and led me inside. The house was cool and dark. It smelled of old wood and dried herbs. She showed me to a small, simple room. It had a tatami mat floor, a futon for sleeping, and one window. The window looked out over a field of green potato plants. Beyond the field, I could see gentle rolling hills. "This is good," I said. "This is very good." She nodded and left me alone. I put my bag down in the corner. I did not unpack. I walked to the window and slid it open. A warm breeze came in, carrying the scent of the earth. I could hear the sound of insects buzzing. That was all. No cars, no trains, no sirens. Just the quiet music of the countryside. I stood there for a long time, just breathing. Later that day, I walked. I had no destination. I just followed a small dirt road that led away from the guest house. The road took me between endless fields. The sun was warm on my face. I walked for hours. I saw farmers working in the distance, small figures bent over the green rows. They did not shout or rush. They moved with a slow, steady rhythm, as if they were part of the land itself. I felt like a man who had been living in a dark room his whole life, and someone had finally opened the door. The colors were overwhelming. The green of the fields was not just one green. There were 100 shades of green. From the bright new leaves of the potato plants to the dark, old needles of the pine trees on the hills, and the blue of the sky was so deep, I felt I could fall into it. I thought about my office in Shinjuku, the beige walls, the fluorescent lights that hummed all day, the sealed windows. I had spent 42 years in that box. I had traded the real world for a world of numbers. As the sun began to set, turning the big wide sky orange and pink, I did not feel regret. That life was over. I felt only a quiet sense of gratitude. I was here now. I was finally here. I walked back to the guest house as darkness fell. The old woman had left a simple dinner for me on a tray. Rice, grilled fish, and pickled vegetables. It was the most delicious meal I had eaten in years. I ate slowly, tasting every bite. Then I lay down on my futon and listened to the sound of the crickets outside my window. It was the sound of a world that was alive, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt I was a part of it. Chapter 4. The Language of Flowers. My days in Hokkaido found a simple repeating pattern. I would wake with the sun. The old woman would leave a small breakfast for me. Then I would walk. My walks became the center of my new life. I was not walking to get anywhere. I was walking just to see, to feel. One morning, I walked further than usual. I followed a path over a small hill. When I reached the top, I stopped. Below me, the world exploded into color. It was a field of lavender, a sea of purple, stretching all the way to a line of dark green trees in the distance. The sight was so beautiful, it made my chest ache. I remembered the picture in Yumi's magazine, but the real thing was so much more. It was not a flat image. It was alive. I walked down into the field. The air was thick with the scent of the flowers. It was a clean, sweet smell that seemed to calm everything inside me. I walked slowly between the rows. Millions of tiny purple flowers brushed against my legs. Bees, heavy with pollen, drifted from one blossom to another, their buzzing a soft, constant hum. I reached out and gently touched one of the plants. The flower was soft, and the stem was strong. I sat down on the ground at the edge of the field. I closed my eyes and just breathed. In that moment, Yumi was with me. I could almost hear her voice, full of wonder. "Oh, Kaito, it is more beautiful than I ever imagined." I remembered her on our small balcony, carefully tending her little pots. She had such a gift for making things grow. She understood the language of flowers. She knew what they needed, and they responded to her care with color and life. My life had been the opposite. I had lived in a world without color, a world of black and white text, of grey suits. I had not nurtured anything. I had only organized and counted. Sitting there, in that field of impossible purple, I felt a deep sadness for the man I had been. The man who had always said, "We will do it later." Later had come and gone. But the sadness was not sharp. It was a gentle, quiet ache. It was mixed with a feeling of profound peace. I was here now. I was seeing this for her. I was breathing this air for her. In a way, we were sharing this moment. I took out the small photograph of her from my jacket. I looked at her smiling face, the red flower in her hand. "We are here, Yumi," I whispered to the picture. "We finally made it." I spent the entire day by that field. I watched as the sun moved across the sky, changing the color of the lavender. In the bright morning light, it was a vibrant, energetic purple. In the soft afternoon, it became a gentle, hazy violet. As the sun began to set, the field glowed with a deep, royal purple, as if it held all the light of the day within it. On other days, I found other fields. There were fields of red poppies, their petals like delicate paper. There were fields of yellow sunflowers, their huge faces all turned towards the sun like a crowd of silent worshippers. Each color was a new feeling, a new word in a language I was just beginning to understand. Red was passion and life. Yellow was warmth and simple happiness. Purple was peace and memory. I never spoke to the farmers. I would just watch them from a distance. They worked with a quiet efficiency. Their movements were sure and practiced. They were connected to this land, to these seasons. They knew when to plant and when to harvest. Their lives were guided by the sun and the rain, not by a clock on the wall. I felt a great respect for them. They were creating all this beauty, not with numbers on a page, but with their own two hands. My summer in Hokkaido was a lesson in slowness. I learned to walk without a destination. I learned to sit for an hour and just watch a cloud move across the sky. I learned that the world was full of a quiet, patient beauty, and all you had to do was stop and pay attention. The ticking clock inside my chest seemed to grow quieter. Here, surrounded by the patient and repeating cycles of nature. A year did not feel so short. It felt like a lifetime. Chapter 5. A different kind of time. The old woman who owned the guest house and I had a silent friendship. We never had a real conversation. In the morning, she would be in her garden when I left for my walk. She would look up from her work and nod at me. I would nod back. In the evening when I returned, my simple meal would be waiting for me. Sometimes it would be on a different tray. Sometimes there would be a small flower in a cup next to my bowl of rice. These were our conversations. A different tray might mean she noticed I seemed more tired. A flower might mean she thought the day was particularly beautiful. I did not know for sure, but I felt a sense of care, of being seen, that I had not felt from anyone in a very long time. One afternoon, a storm came. The big blue sky disappeared behind a wall of dark grey clouds. The wind began to blow, making the potato plants in the field dance wildly. The old woman called to me from her porch. She gestured for me to come inside. I sat with her in her kitchen as the rain began to fall. It was a small warm room that smelled of tea and wood smoke. She poured me a cup of tea. It was bitter and hot. We sat in silence, listening to the sound of the rain hitting the roof. I watched her hands as she mended a torn piece of clothing. They were not beautiful hands. They were wrinkled and strong, with dirt under the fingernails. They were hands that had spent a lifetime working, planting, cooking, and fixing. I thought of my own hands. They were pale and soft. They had spent a lifetime holding a pen, typing on a keyboard, and turning pages. My hands had never created anything. They had only managed what others had created. Sitting in that kitchen, I felt a kind of shame for their softness, for their uselessness. The storm passed as quickly as it came. The sun came out and the wet world outside sparkled. A rainbow appeared over the hills, a perfect arc of color. The old woman and I went outside. The air was clean and fresh. She pointed at the rainbow and smiled a wide, toothless smile. I smiled back. In that moment, I understood that a life did not have to be big to be full. Her life was here, in this small house, with this garden and these fields. But it was a life connected to the earth, to the sky, to the seasons. It was a real life. My time in Hokkaido was changing me. In Tokyo, my time was divided into minutes and hours. Meetings at 10, lunch at 12, the train at 6. My life was a series of appointments. Here, time was different. It was measured by the position of the sun. It was measured by the hunger in my stomach. It was measured by the feeling of tiredness in my legs after a long walk. This was a natural time, a human time. I stopped wearing my watch. I left it in my bag. At first, I felt lost without it. I would look at my empty wrist and feel a small panic. But after a few days, the feeling went away. I learned to tell the time by looking at the shadows on the ground. I learned to feel when it was time to eat, when it was time to rest. My thoughts also became slower. In the city, my mind was always busy, always full of worries about work, about money, about the future. Here, my mind became quiet. When I walked, I just thought about walking. I thought about the feeling of the ground under my feet. I thought about the color of a wildflower by the side of the road. My worries about the past and the future began to fade. There was only today. There was only this moment, this walk, this breath. The summer in Hokkaido was coming to an end. The days became a little shorter. The air in the morning had a new, cool feeling. I knew it was time to move on. I needed to see the autumn. On my last day, I packed my small bag. I left some money on the table in my room, more than enough for my stay. As I walked down the gravel path, the old woman was in her garden. She had a small basket. She came to me and held it out. Inside were 3 perfect red tomatoes, still warm from the sun. I took them and bowed deeply. She nodded, her face as kind and calm as always. We did not say a word. No words were needed. I walked to the bus stop, holding the tomatoes carefully in my hands. They were a gift. They were a farewell. They were a memory of a quiet, simple time under a very wide sky. Chapter 6. The Train South. The journey from the north of Japan to its heart was a slow, gentle transition. I took local trains, not the fast bullet trains that erase the landscape into a blur. The local trains stopped at every small town. They moved with a slow, rocking rhythm that was like a lullaby. I spent 2 days on these trains, watching the world change through the large, clean windows. The wild, open spaces of Hokkaido gave way to the mountains and valleys of Honshu, the main island of Japan. We passed through forests of dark cedar trees, their tall shapes like the spires of a natural cathedral. We followed the coasts of wide, calm rivers, where fishermen stood patiently in the water. We passed through small towns, where life seemed to move at a slower pace, where old women swept their doorsteps, and children played in the streets. I was in no hurry. The journey itself was part of my experience. On the train, I was an observer. I was not part of the world outside, but I was not separate from it either. I was a silent witness to the everyday lives of other people. I watched a young mother try to calm her crying baby. I saw 2 old friends laughing together, their faces full of shared memories. I watched a young student staring out the inn window, his face full of dreams about the future. Each person was a story. My story was ending, but theirs was still being written. I did not feel envy. I felt a sense of connection, a quiet understanding that we are all on a journey of our own. I ate simple meals that I bought at the train stations. They were called ekiben, lunch boxes filled with local specialties. In one town, it was grilled squid over rice. In another, it was sweet chestnuts and mushrooms. Each box was a taste of the place I was passing through. Eating them, I felt like I was consuming a small piece of the local culture, of the land itself. During the long hours on the train, I had a lot of time to think. My thoughts often returned to Yumi. I imagined her sitting next to me, looking out the window. I knew she would have loved this. She would have pointed out the different kinds of trees. She would have wondered about the people who lived in the small houses we passed. Her curiosity about the world was endless. My curiosity had been buried for so long, under my work and my routine. Now it was slowly coming back to life. I found myself wondering about things again. I wondered what kind of fish the men in the river were catching. I wondered what the 2 old friends were laughing about. As the train moved further south, I began to see the first signs of autumn. On the high slopes of the mountains, some of the leaves were beginning to change color. There were flashes of yellow and orange among the deep green. It was like an artist had just begun a new painting, adding the first few strokes of bright color to a vast canvas. The sight filled me with a quiet anticipation. The season was turning, and so was my journey. Finally, the train arrived in Kyoto. The station was large and modern, a shock of noise and activity after the quiet countryside. For a moment, I felt the old stress of the city return. The river of people was here too, but this time, I was different. I was not in a hurry. I did not push my way through the crowd. I stood to one side and let the river flow around me. I was a visitor here, a temporary guest. I found a small old inn, a ryokan, in a quiet neighborhood away from the main tourist areas. My room was simple, with tatami floors and paper screens for walls. From my window, I could see a small enclosed garden. There was a single maple tree in the center of the garden. Most of its leaves were still green, but a few on the highest branches had already turned a brilliant, fiery red. It was a promise of the beauty to come. That night, I fell asleep to the sound of a distant temple bell. The sound was deep and slow, and it seemed to seep into my bones, telling me to be still, to be patient. Autumn had arrived, and I was ready for it. Chapter 7. Whispers in the Bamboo. Kyoto is a city of 1,000 temples. In my old life, if I had come here, I would have had a list. I would have rushed from the Golden Pavilion to the Fushimi Inari Shrine. I would have taken photographs to prove I had been there. I would have collected experiences, like a child collects stamps. But I was not that man anymore. My journey was not about collecting things. It was about feeling things, so I avoided the famous places. I did not want to see beauty through a crowd of other people. I wanted to find it in the quiet corners of the city. I bought a map, but I used it only to find the general direction of the mountains that surround the city. Then, I would just walk. I would follow small, unnamed streets. I would let myself get lost. One morning, my walking led me to a place called Arashiyama, famous for its bamboo grove. I knew the main path would be full of tourists. So I took a smaller, less used trail that led up a hill. The trail was steep and narrow. After a few minutes, the sounds of the city disappeared. The only sound was my own breathing and the crunch of my shoes on the dry leaves. And then I entered it. It was a forest, but not like any I had seen before. The bamboo stalks were tall and straight, like giant green poles reaching for the sky. They grew so close together that they formed a kind of canopy, a roof of green leaves. The light that came through was soft and green, as if I were underwater. I walked deeper into the grove. The air was cool and still. A feeling of great peace came over me. The bamboo stalks were all around me, 1,000 silent sentinels. They were old and strong. I reached out and touched one. The surface was smooth and cool. It felt ancient, full of a quiet wisdom. A soft wind began to blow. It moved through the tops of the bamboo, making the leaves rustle. It was not a loud sound. It was a whisper. It sounded like the forest was talking, telling secrets in a language I could not understand with my mind, but that I could feel in my soul. Then, the bamboo stalks themselves began to move. They swayed gently in the wind, knocking against each other with a soft, hollow, clacking sound. It was a kind of music, a natural symphony of wood and wind. I found a small rock and sat down. I closed my eyes and just listened. The whispering of the leaves, the clacking of the stalks, the sound filled my head and emptied it of all my thoughts. There were no memories of Yumi. There were no worries about my sickness. There was only the sound. In that green, quiet world, I began to think about my past, not with the sharp pain of regret, but with a new, gentle curiosity. My life had been so rigid, so straight, like a single, unbending line. I had always believed this was the right way to be, strong, unwavering. But here in this forest, the bamboo was showing me a different kind of strength. It was strong, yes. It stood tall, but it was also flexible. When the wind blew, it bent, it yielded, it did not break. My own life had been brittle. I had not known how to bend. I had resisted change. I had been afraid of emotions, of the things that make us human. I had built a hard shell around myself. Yumi had tried to break through that shell with her warmth and her laughter, but I had kept it strong. I had believed that was my duty as a man, as a husband, to be the unbending provider. A profound sadness washed over me. I had missed so much. I had been present in body, but my mind, my spirit, had been somewhere else, lost in the world of numbers and responsibilities. I had not bent towards my wife's joy. I had not swayed with the music of her dreams. And then, the wind of life blew too hard, and she was gone. I had not broken, but I had been left hollow inside. I opened my eyes. The light was still green. The bamboo was still whispering. The sadness was still there, but it was not a destructive force. It was a clean, clear feeling. It was the truth. I had made mistakes. I had been a fool. I accepted it. I sat there for a long time, letting the truth wash over me, letting the forest whisper its secrets of strength and flexibility. I could not change the past. I could not bring Yumi back, but I could learn from the bamboo. I could learn to bend. I could learn to be soft. I could learn to listen to the whispers of the world around me. My journey was not just about seeing new places. It was about becoming a new person. Even as my time was running out, Chapter 8, The Weight of Stones, my walks in Kyoto continued. I found that the city's true treasures were not its grand golden temples, but its small hidden gardens. These gardens were worlds in miniature. They were places of profound quiet and deep thought. One afternoon, I stumbled upon a small temple that was not on any tourist map. The wooden gate was old and grey. I was not sure if it was open to the public. I pushed it gently. It creaked open. Inside, there was no grand building, no golden statues. There was only a garden made of moss and stones. It was a karasansui, a dry landscape garden. There was no water. The ground was covered in a thick, green carpet of moss, soft and velvety. From this sea of green, a few large dark stones emerged. They were arranged in a simple, careful pattern. A thin layer of raked white gravel surrounded the moss, creating lines that looked like ripples in water. In one corner stood a single, old maple tree, its leaves a brilliant crimson red. There was a narrow wooden porch along one side of the garden. I took off my shoes and sat down on the cool, smooth wood. I was the only person there. The silence was absolute. It was a silence that was not empty. It was full of presence, full of meaning. I looked at the stones. They were dark and heavy. They had been there for hundreds of years. They had been covered in snow in the winter and baked by the sun in the summer. They had felt the rain of 1,000 storms. They were silent witnesses to the passing of time. They did not move. They did not change. They simply existed. I thought about the weight of my own life. I had carried so many heavy things. The weight of responsibility at my job. The weight of providing for my family. The weight of my own expectations. And for the last 3 years, the heaviest weight of all, the weight of my grief for Yumi. These weights had pressed down on me, made me hard and stiff. Looking at the stones in the garden, I saw a different kind of weight. Their weight was not a burden. It was their nature. It was their strength. It gave them permanence. They were anchors in a changing world. And then I looked at the moss. It was the opposite of the stones. It was soft, alive, and delicate. It covered the ground. It grew over the base of the stones, softening their hard edges. It was a living blanket of green. It represented the life that grows and changes, the life that is soft and yielding. And finally, I looked at the red leaves of the maple tree. They were beautiful, but they were temporary. They were a momentary flash of brilliant color before they would fall and disappear. They represented the fleeting, beautiful moments of life, the moments of joy, of love, of beauty that come and go so quickly. The garden was a picture of life itself, the permanent and the temporary, the hard and the soft, the changing and the unchanging. For the first time, I felt I could see my own life in this garden, my work, my routine, that had been my stones, my love for Yumi, that had been the moss, the living green that made everything beautiful, and our moments of shared laughter, our dreams of travel. Those had been the red leaves, beautiful and brief. I sat on that porch for hours, until the afternoon light began to fade. A great sense of peace settled over me. I had been trying to hold on to the red leaves. I had been mourning their loss, but the garden taught me that this was the nature of things. The leaves must fall, but the stones remain, and the moss, the life force, continues to grow. My love for Yumi, the memories of her, those were my stones. They were permanent. They were the foundation of who I was. Her death did not change that. Her absence was a heavy stone, yes, but it was part of my landscape now. And my journey, my choice to live this final year with open eyes, that was my moss. It was my own small patch of green, my own act of living. I finally understood what it meant to make peace with the past. It did not mean forgetting. It meant accepting the whole landscape of my life, the hard parts and the soft parts, the beautiful moments and the painful ones. They were all part of the same garden. As I put on my shoes and quietly closed the old temple gate behind me, I felt lighter. I was still carrying my stones, but they were no longer a burden. They were just a part of me. The weight of the stones was simply the weight of a life that had been lived. Chapter 9. The Grey Sea. As autumn's colors faded, a chill began to fill the air. The crisp mornings of Kyoto turned into cold, damp days. I knew it was time for my journey to enter its next season. I took another slow train, this time heading west, towards the coast of the Sea of Japan. This side of the country is known for its harsh, grey winters. That was what I wanted. After the vibrant life of summer and the fiery beauty of autumn, I felt a need for something stark, simple, and honest. The landscape changed again. The mountains became steeper, the forest darker. We passed through long tunnels, and each time we emerged, the world seemed a little greyer, a little colder. Finally, I arrived in a small fishing village. It was not a pretty place. The houses were made of dark, weathered wood, built close together to protect against the wind. The streets were narrow and empty. The sky was a single, unbroken sheet of grey cloud, and beyond the town, there was the sea. The sea was not the calm blue ocean of my imagination. It was a churning, angry grey, the same colour as the sky. The waves were large and powerful, crashing against a concrete seawall, with a constant thunderous roar. A cold, wet wind blew in from the water, carrying the smell of salt and fish. It was a hard, unwelcoming place. And yet, I felt it was exactly where I needed to be. I found a room in a small inn, a Minshuku, run by an old woman even older than the one in Hokkaido. Her face was like a dried apple, and she rarely spoke. She just looked at me with her dark, intelligent eyes, and I felt she knew my story without me having to say a word. My room was small and cold. It had a small gas heater that made a hissing sound. From my window, I could see the grey sea. It was a view of immense raw power. My body was feeling the cold. The sickness inside me, which had been quiet during the warm months, was beginning to stir. I felt a new kind of tiredness, a deep ache in my bones that did not go away with rest. My long walks became shorter. I bought a thick woolen coat and a hat in the village's only shop. Each day, I would bundle myself up and walk down to the harbour. The harbour was the heart of the village. It was full of small, sturdy fishing boats, painted in dull shades of blue and green. They knocked against each other in the rough water. The fishermen were men with hard faces and strong bodies. They moved with a purpose I had not seen before. They were not just working the land, they were fighting the sea. I would watch them for hours as they prepared their boats, their movements efficient and sure. They mended their nets with thick, calloused fingers. They spoke to each other in short, rough sentences, their voices often lost in the sound of the wind and the waves. I felt a great admiration for these men. Their lives were a daily struggle against a powerful, unpredictable force. Yet, they were not angry or defeated. They had a quiet dignity, a deep resilience. They understood the sea. They respected its power, but they were not afraid of it. This place was teaching me a different kind of beauty. It was not the easy, colorful beauty of a flower field. It was a hard, strong beauty. The beauty of a rock that has been shaped by the waves for 1,000 years. The beauty of a tree that is bent and twisted by the wind. but still holds on to the cliff. It was the beauty of survival. My own survival was now a question of months, maybe even weeks. The doctor's timeline was no longer an abstract idea. I could feel it in my own body. Some mornings, it was hard to get out of my futon. The ache in my bones was a constant companion, but looking out at the grey, powerful sea, I did not feel despair. I felt a strange sense of companionship. The sea was a force of nature, and so was my illness. Both were powerful, indifferent, and beyond my control. There was no point in fighting them. The fishermen did not fight the sea. They learned its rhythms, respected its power, and found a way to live with it. I needed to learn to do the same, with my own approaching end. Chapter 10. The Fisherman's Hands. The old woman who ran the inn was named Chio. I learned her name from the small sign over the door. Like the woman in Hokkaido, we communicated without words. My presence was a silent routine for her. In the morning, a tray would appear outside my door. It always had a bowl of hot miso soup, which warmed me from the inside out, a bowl of rice, and a piece of grilled fish, fresh from the harbour. In the evening, another tray would appear. She never knocked. She was a ghost of quiet care. One day, I returned from my short walk, feeling colder than usual. A deep chill had settled into my bones, and I could not stop shivering. I went to my room and got under the thick blankets of my futon, but I could not get warm. My breathing was shallow, and I felt very weak. I think I fell asleep. When I woke up, the room was dark. Chio was there. She had brought a new, thicker futon and had placed it on top of me. She also brought a small pot of steaming hot tea. She knelt by my side and poured the tea into a small cup. She did not speak. She just held the cup out to me. My hands were shaking too much to hold it. She seemed to understand. She put her own strong, wrinkled hand over mine, steadying it as I lifted the cup to my lips. The tea was hot and bitter, but it felt like life itself flowing into me. She stayed there silently until I had finished the cup. Then she nodded once, took the empty cup, and left the room, closing the paper screen door softly behind her. I lay there under the weight of the warm blankets and felt a profound sense of gratitude. This woman, a complete stranger, was caring for me. Her care was not emotional or sentimental. It was practical. It was simple. It was the kind of care you give to any living thing that is struggling. It was the care of a fisherman mending his net, of a farmer watering his plants. It was a fundamental act of humanity. For 3 days, I did not leave my room. I was too weak. Every morning and every evening, Chio would bring me food and hot tea. She would check my heater. She would bring me a fresh bottle of hot water to hold against my chest. Her presence was a silent, comforting rhythm in my sick days. On the 4th day, I felt a little stronger. I was able to get up and walk to the window. The sea was still grey. The sky was still grey. But something had changed in me. In my weakness, I had found a new kind of connection. I had allowed someone to care for me. For my whole adult life, I had been the provider, the strong one. I had never allowed myself to be weak, to be vulnerable. Here, in this cold, grey place, this old woman had given me the gift of accepting help when I felt strong enough. I went for a walk to the harbour again. I looked at the fishermen with new eyes. I did not just see their strength anymore. I saw their interdependence. They worked together, pulling in the heavy nets. They relied on each other in the dangerous sea. Their strength was not just individual, it was communal. They were a web of silent support, just like Chio's quiet care for me. I watched one old fisherman sitting on a wooden crate, mending a large net. His hands moved with a slow, practiced grace. They were a testament to a life of hard work. They were cracked and calloused, the knuckles swollen, but they were also incredibly skillful. He found each broken thread and, With a few quick, precise movements, he made it whole again. I thought of my own soft hands, and I thought of Chio's hands, steadying mine on the teacup. Hands are for more than just work. They are for connection, for holding, for mending, for caring. I had kept my hands to myself for too long. In my final season, I was finally learning the importance of a simple, human touch. That night, when Chio brought my dinner, I looked her in the eyes and bowed my head as deeply as I could. "Arigato," I said. "Thank you." It was one of the few words we ever exchanged. She just gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was enough. Chapter 11. A Blanket of Snow. Winter deepened its hold on the small village. The wind from the sea grew colder, and some mornings there was a thin layer of ice on the puddles in the street. Then, one afternoon, the snow began to fall. It did not start with a few gentle flakes. It was as if the grey sky had suddenly ripped open. The snow came down in a thick, silent curtain, and within an hour, the world was gone. I stood at my window and watched. The dark wooden houses, the grey seawall, the black fishing boats in the harbour. Everything disappeared under a thick blanket of white. The world became simple, reduced to only two colours: the white of the snow and the dark grey of the sea. The constant roar of the waves was muffled, softened by the snow. A profound silence fell over the village. It was the deepest quiet I had ever known. For 2 days, it snowed without stopping. No one left their houses. There were no cars, no footprints. The village was asleep under its white blanket. My world became my small room, the hissing of the heater, the view of the endless falling snow, the quiet rhythm of Chio's trays appearing at my door. I was completely isolated, and yet I did not feel lonely. The silence and the simplicity of the white world outside created a space for my thoughts to become very clear. In this pure white world, I thought about death. I had been walking towards it for months, but I had not looked at it directly. I had been focused on living. Now, with the world outside paused, suspended in white, I could finally turn and face it. I realized that my fear of death was not a fear of the end. It was a fear of not having lived. I had been afraid of dying, with a heart full of regrets, but my journey had been washing those regrets away, one by one. The summer in Hokkaido had washed away the regret of not seeing beauty. The autumn in Kyoto had washed away the regret of my own rigidity, my own emotional blindness. The winter here, by the sea, was washing away my fear of weakness, my fear of being alone. I was not the same man who had left Tokyo. That man was full of grey lines and unspoken sadness. This man, the man watching the snow fall, was quieter, softer. He had learned to see colour. He had learned to feel the wind. He had learned to accept the kindness of a stranger. The snow was like a final purification. It was covering up the old world, making everything clean and new. I thought of my own body, the sickness growing inside. It was a kind of winter. My energy was fading. My strength was leaving me. But like the world outside, my spirit felt clean. It felt quiet. It felt at peace. Death was not a monster in the dark. It was just this, a great silence, a deep rest, a blanket of white. It was the end of a season, and every season has its end. That is the natural way of things. On the third day, I woke up to a brilliant light. I went to my window. The snow had stopped. The sun was out. The sky was a perfect cloudless blue. The world outside was dazzling. The snow on the roofs, on the ground, on the boats. It all sparkled with a light so bright it hurt my eyes. The sea was no longer grey. It was a deep, calm blue, reflecting the colour of the sky. The village slowly came back to life. I saw the fishermen emerging from their houses, their dark coats bright against the white snow, They began to clear the snow from their boats, their laughter and shouts echoing in the clean, cold air. The world felt new. It felt full of hope. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my soul, that this was my last winter. I would not see the snow again, but I did not feel sad. I felt like I had been given a great gift. I had been allowed to see the world in its winter beauty, in its moment of deep rest, and its bright, new awakening. I had found peace in the heart of the storm. My own spring was coming. It would be a different kind of spring, a final one, but I was ready for it. My journey was not over yet. There was one last season to feel. Chapter 12. The Final Journey. Leaving the snow-covered village was difficult. My body was weak, and the journey south was long. The cold of the winter had settled deep inside me, and the ache was now a constant companion. Chio must have seen the change in me. On the morning I left, she did not just leave my tray. She knocked on my door and helped me carry my small bag to the bus stop. She had wrapped a warm scarf around my neck. We stood together in the cold, waiting for the bus, two small old figures in a vast white landscape. When the bus arrived, she simply patted my arm. It was a gesture of farewell, of good luck, of understanding. I looked at her one last time as the bus pulled away. She was just a small dark shape against the snow, a symbol of the quiet, profound kindness I had found in the heart of winter. The journey to Okinawa, the southernmost islands of Japan, was a journey from one world to another. It required several trains, and finally a short flight. Each step of the journey was a challenge. In the train stations, I had to rest often. I felt dizzy and lightheaded. The simple act of walking with my bag was exhausting. People rushed past me, their faces full of purpose and energy. I was moving in slow motion, a visitor from a different, slower time. During the flight, I sat by the window. I watched as we flew over the main islands of Japan, the land a patchwork of dark mountains and grey cities. Then, we were over the ocean. The water below changed, from a dark, cold blue to a brilliant, clear turquoise. Small green islands appeared, surrounded by white rings of sand. The light itself seemed to change. It was brighter, warmer, softer. When I stepped off the plane in Okinawa, the air hit me like a warm, soft blanket. It was humid and smelled of salt and flowers, a scent so different from the cold, clean air of the north. My thick winter coat was suddenly heavy and absurd. I took it off, and for the first time in months, I felt the warmth of the sun directly on my skin. It felt like a blessing. This was the final part of my journey. I knew it in a way that was deeper than thought. My body was telling me it did not have another journey left in it. This was the last stop. I was not sad. I was calm. I had planned it this way. I had traveled with the seasons, and I had arrived in the land of endless spring to meet my end. I took a taxi from the airport. I gave the driver the address of a small cottage I had found online. It was on a small, quiet island, away from the big hotels and tourist beaches. The drive was beautiful. We drove along the coast. On one side was the impossibly blue sea. On the other were fields of sugarcane and small villages with houses that had red-tiled roofs. Bright pink and red flowers bloomed everywhere, spilling over walls and fences. The world was bursting with life. The taxi driver was a friendly man. He tried to talk to me, asking me where I was from and what I planned to see. I answered in short, simple sentences. I did not have the energy for a long conversation. He seemed to understand. He turned on the radio, and soft, gentle Okinawan music filled the car. It was a slow, happy music, played on a stringed instrument called a sanshin. It was the perfect soundtrack for this last journey. The cottage was exactly as I had hoped. It was a small, simple wooden house, set in a garden full of tropical flowers. It was not directly on the beach, but it was on a small hill. and from its small wooden porch, I could see the sea. The view was perfect. A wide expanse of blue water, a line of white waves breaking on a distant reef, and the endless sky. The owner of the cottage, a young woman with a kind smile, showed me around. The cottage was just one room, with a small kitchen and a bathroom. The main feature was the wall of glass doors that opened onto the porch. She showed me how to use everything, and then she left, telling me to call her if I needed anything. I was finally here. The end of the line. I put my small bag in the corner. I did not need to unpack. I took off my shoes and walked out onto the wooden porch. The wood was warm under my feet. I sat down in a simple wooden chair. A gentle breeze was blowing, carrying the scent of flowers. I looked out at the sea, and I felt a sense of homecoming. I had never been to this place before, but it felt like the place I was always meant to be. Chapter 13. The Color of Life. My days in Okinawa were not days of action. They were days of observation. My world had become very small, but also very rich. The porch of my small cottage was my kingdom. The view of the sea was my landscape. The changing light was my clock. I could no longer take walks. My legs were too weak. Just walking from my bed to the porch was a slow, careful journey. My body was failing, but my senses felt more alive than ever. I had spent my life ignoring the world around me. Now I did nothing but pay attention. I would wake up early, before the sun. The sky would be a soft, dark grey, and the sea would be calm and quiet. Then, slowly, the first light would appear on the horizon, a thin line of pink and orange. The light would grow, spreading across the sky, turning the clouds purple and gold. The sea would catch the light and turn from grey to a deep, dark blue. Watching the sunrise was my morning ritual. Each one was different. Each one was a masterpiece. And each one was a gift. In the middle of the day, the sun was bright and hot. The sea would become a brilliant turquoise, so bright it was hard to look at. Small fishing boats would go out, their white shapes small against the vast blue. I would watch them until they were just tiny dots on the horizon. I wondered about the men on those boats. Their lives were so different from mine, but we shared this sun, this sea. My favorite time of day was the late afternoon. The light became soft and golden. The heat of the day would lessen. A gentle breeze would always pick up. I would sit on my porch and feel the breeze on my skin. It was like a gentle hand caressing my face. The world would become very quiet. The only sounds were the distant, gentle roar of the waves and the rustling of the leaves in the trees around my cottage. The colors of this place were the colors of life itself, the vibrant green of the leaves, the shocking pink of the bougainvillea flowers that climbed the side of my cottage, the impossible blue of the sea, and the pure, clean white of the sand I could see in the distance. After a lifetime of grey, I was living in a world of pure, saturated color. I had very little human contact. The young woman who owned the cottage would come once every few days. She would bring me groceries, fresh fruit, rice, fish, and vegetables. She would ask me if I was okay. I would nod and say yes. Her smile was always kind. She never asked me why I was alone or why I never left the cottage. I think she understood, in the way that people who live close to nature understand the cycles of life and death. One day, she brought me a small, perfectly ripe mango from my father's tree, she said. I ate it that afternoon on the porch. The fruit was sweet and juicy. The taste was like sunshine. It was a simple thing, a piece of fruit, but it felt like the most luxurious gift. It was a taste of the island, a taste of life itself. My thoughts were simple. I did not think about my past with regret anymore. I did not think about the future with fear. I was living completely in the present moment. My mind, which had once been so full of complex numbers and worries, was now empty and calm. My only thought was to observe. To see the way a small lizard did push-ups on the railing of my porch, to watch a butterfly with blue wings dance among the flowers, to feel the warmth of the sun on my old tired hands. Yumi was with me always, not as a sad memory, but as a joyful presence. I would look at the bright pink flowers, and I would think, Yumi would love these. I would taste the sweet fruit and think, Yumi would have enjoyed this so much. I felt like I was collecting these small, beautiful moments for her. I was her eyes, her senses. Our journey was finally complete. We had found her colors. We had found her garden. It was here, all around me. Chapter 14, Petals on the Wind. In the garden of my cottage, there was a single cherry blossom tree. It was unusual to see one so far south, but there it was. When I first arrived, it was just a collection of dark, bare branches. But in the warmth of the Okinawan spring, small green buds began to appear. I watched them every day. They grew slowly, patiently. Then one morning, I woke up to a miracle. The tree had exploded in a cloud of soft pink flowers. It was breathtakingly beautiful. The delicate pink blossoms stood out against the deep blue of the sea. For the next week, the tree was the center of my world. I would watch it from my porch for hours. The flowers, the sakura, are a powerful symbol in Japan. They are a reminder of the beauty and the fragility of life. They bloom with an incredible, intense beauty, but only for a very short time. Then, they are gone. I understood the sakura in a way I never had before. My own life was a cherry blossom. I was in my moment of full bloom, my journey, the beauty I was seeing, the peace I was feeling. This was my final beautiful flowering. And I knew, just like the blossoms, that it would be brief. The wind would blow through the tree, and a few petals would break free and dance in the air. They looked like pink snow. They would drift down and land on the wooden floor of my porch. On my lap, on my hands. I would pick one up and look at it closely. It was so thin, so delicate, and yet so perfectly beautiful. My own body was becoming like a petal. I felt thin, light, almost transparent. My energy was fading quickly now. Some days, I did not have the strength to sit in my chair on the porch. I would lie on my futon and look out through the open glass doors. The view of the sea and the cherry blossom tree would fill my vision. I was not eating much anymore. I had no appetite. My world was shrinking, but it was not a frightening process. It felt natural. It felt right. I was letting go of things, one by one. I was letting go of my body, of my strength, of my connection to the physical world. All that was left was my consciousness, my awareness, and it was full of a calm, quiet joy. The peak of the cherry blossoms lasted for only a few days. Then, the inevitable began to happen. The petals started to fall. At first, it was just a few at a time, carried by the breeze. Then, a stronger wind would come, and a whole shower of pink would rain down from the tree. The garden floor became a carpet of pink. The tree was letting go of its beauty, releasing it back into the world. I watched this process with a sense of profound peace. This was not a sad event. It was not a death. It was a transformation. It was a completion. The tree had done what it was meant to do. It had created its moment of beauty, and now it was time to rest. I felt the same way. I had done what I had come here to do. I had seen the seasons. I had made peace with my past. I had found a quiet joy in the simple act of being. I was ready to let go. My petals were ready to fall. I was not afraid. There was a simple, beautiful logic to it. Life blooms, and then it fades. It was the most natural thing in the world. I lay on my futon, feeling the gentle breeze come in through the open door, and I watched the last of the petals dance on the wind. Chapter 15. The sound of the sea. My last days were like a long, slow dream. The world around me became soft and hazy. The sharp colors of the sea and the flowers began to blur. The sounds of the world, the birds, the wind, the distant waves, they all blended into one gentle, continuous hum. Time no longer had any meaning. There was no morning, no afternoon, no night. There was only a continuous, peaceful present. I did not leave my futon anymore. I did not have the strength. The young woman who owned the cottage found me like that. She came in with my groceries and saw me lying there, my eyes open, looking out at the sea. She did not panic. She came and knelt beside me. She felt my forehead. She brought me a cool cloth and a cup of water. I could only take a small sip. She understood. She started coming every day. She would sit quietly in a chair by my futon. Sometimes she would read a book. Sometimes she would just sit and look out at the sea with me. We rarely spoke. Her presence was enough. It was a silent promise that I would not be alone at the very end. My thoughts were no longer clear stories or memories. They were just feelings. I would feel a wave of warmth, and I would know it was the memory of Yumi's hand in mine. I would feel a flash of cool purple, and I would know it was the lavender fields of Hokkaido. I would feel the solid, steady weight of a stone, and I would know it was the moss garden in Kyoto. I would feel a cold, clean wind, and I would know it was the winter sea. My journey was no longer a story in my head. It had become a part of me, a collection of sensory memories that now defined who I was. My final memory, my final thought, was of Yumi. I did not see her face. I just felt her presence, as if she were sitting on the other side of my futon, holding my hand. It was not a sad feeling. It was a feeling of peace, of reunion. Our journey was over. We were together again. One evening, the young woman was sitting with me. The sun was setting. It was the most beautiful sunset I had ever seen. The whole sky was on fire, a blaze of orange, pink, and deep purple. The light filled the small room, covering everything in a warm golden glow. I watched it until the last sliver of the sun disappeared below the horizon. The colors faded, leaving the sky a soft, deep violet. My breathing was very shallow now. Each breath was a small effort. I was tired. I was so very tired. A deep desire for rest, for sleep, washed over me. I turned my head slightly to look at the young woman. I tried to smile. I wanted to thank her for her kindness. I do not know if my mouth moved. I hope she understood. I closed my eyes. The world of sight was gone. All that was left was sound. And the only sound was the sea. It was the gentle rhythmic sound of the waves washing onto the shore and then pulling back again. In and out, in and out. It was the sound of a great slow breath. The breath of the world. I listened to that sound. It was the first sound on earth. And it would be the last. I focused all of my attention on it. The sound of the waves. In and out. I let my own small breath join that rhythm. In and out. And then I let go. My last breath went out and joined the gentle, endless sound of the sea. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe for more.